What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of CANiVISION Live. It's my absolute pleasure today to bring to all of you Mr. Darryl Cotton. He's a force to be reckoned with. Darryl is an activist, an advocate, and community soldier out there on the streets down in San Diego. He knows some of my close friends up here in Los Angeles as well. He is the founder of 151farms.org. He's doing a lot of great work in the community, coast to coast. For the people at home who aren't as familiar with you or your work, could you give them a quick upload of that information before we get started here?
Okay. Hopefully I won't ramble too far along multiple different lines here, but 151 stands for a pound of cannabis, 5 pounds of food for one community. And my background's electrical engineering, but I had manufacturing for artificial grow lights under my company, Indigrow. And that got me looking at the plant's response to indoor spectrums that would optimize growing conditions indoors that they might have seen outdoors. So all the things that you can do to optimize the growing conditions can be done indoors on a repeatable basis. Lighting's a big part of that. But you have to realize that you're taking power off the grid. And if everybody's going to be growing indoors, that's a big demand on our grid. So I've looked at ways to not only save on power with Tesla coil lamps. It's still not as perfect as the sun. And if you can use the sun, you should. And then in terms of water consumption, I started working with aquaculture, which is plants interacting with the fish water on a continuous basis, a constant recirculation of the water. And by doing that, I was able to replicate water running over a stream. And if you noticed, anytime in nature, the healthiest plant growth is always on both sides of those streams. So water is plentifully available. And I saw that as an opportunity to replicate that on managed grows for urban society, those parts of our society that have been historically and disproportionately affected by our nation's war on drugs, to give them these opportunities to grow cash crops like hemp and cannabis, but also hops and the food for traditional crops that we would eat, not necessarily have something that's store-bought or food. Kids today think the food comes from a drive-through. Well, believe me, once you start getting into a 151 concept, you have more farms, not less. The community starts to identify with that. It keeps the money within our systems, local money that is, and it allows empowerment. And if that's really what our government wants to see us do, this is a concrete way of providing that. And my model is here in San Diego, but I've had people reach out to me from Africa, all over the world, because it is a unique style of growing that I've gotten here that allows you to grow cannabis and other flowering plants that historically aquaculture is mostly good for vegetative growth only.
No, you're good.
Well, I'm 60 and I'm feeling good. I'm actually finding that, when you poke a bear long and hard enough, it will respond. And in this case, California's proven back from 2016 when they pushed a progressive marijuana policy under Prop 64, it's proven to be anything but. So I had to react to that and respond with now friends across the country who have had alliances with some of the nationally recognized activist groups. And when those groups support the MORE Act, just like they did with Prop 64, I would ask, what did you see in that initiative, the Prop 64 initiative, that would have let you want to? It's not been beneficial at all. It's been highly restrictive, and it's not been something that has benefited our community, as I'm sure over 90% of the people would tell you today, and that includes the licensees.
Pretty powerful friends from coast to coast. What would you say is the biggest threat to us moving forward with your initiatives and those similar to you across the country?
I think it's the way the message is being perceived. If you look back to the 70s and 80s, there was Cheech and Chong. Everything was seen as a recreational, let's get high and just, kind of get couch locked for the benefits of cannabis. And there's a lot to be said for that. But if you look at the medical side of cannabis, which Dr. Raphael Mechoulam, first identified tetrahydrocannabinol and the benefits that as a multi-spectrum influence on our endocannabinoid system, we were repairing things that historically were very hard to do and not always able to explain how. So if you consider the same parallel to aspirin, it works, but we're not always sure why. And then the multi-diversity of individuals all have unique endocannabinoid systems. what we had to look at is additional research, but not necessarily research that would isolate the cannabinoids. It's allowing them to work in this entourage or this symphony effect for a myriad of conditions that are not addictive. So I'm very sensitive to opiates. I don't want to be addicted. I other than my cannabis, I don't drink alcohol. I try to live a healthy lifestyle, and that lets me be pretty clear-headed in terms of what these laws are and what they're designed to do. And if they're designed to monopolize an industry, well, I got to hand it to you. You guys have managed to do it. It's up to us, the people, to recognize that that's the full intent and do our best to thwart that.
You're just doing some great work, not only with your actions out there, protesting consistently, but also the people that you support. We just need more people with this information out there from coast to coast so they can actually join the fight. Just like you said, like people want to label us, a bunch of stoners, a bunch of hippie stoners, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's always that side of society that's going to be in that lane. But there are people that need that medicine, like myself. I got off of opioids because of cannabis. Learn more about the endocannabinoid system. We need to educate the masses on that, and we need to be doing more of what you're doing and like learning how to grow our own. Right?
Yes.
You're working with some folks out in New Jersey. Also, one of the most disappointing things that I saw come out of New Jersey was the fact that they were not allowed to actually possess their own plants and grow their own plants in their domiciles.
Well, there's a lot of effort by states to see recreational cannabis laws passed. And I think the number one thing I point to whenever I'm involved in dialogues with groups that are trying to promote recreational cannabis is if we're going to get that passed at the federal level, then the first thing we've got to do is square that with our international commitments. And there's the United Nations Single Convention on Narcotics, which has been in place for some 60 years. And it's always treated cannabis as acceptable under medical and scientific purposes. It's in, if you go to my website, No More on 64, all the links are there to everything I'm telling you. So if you open up the links and you go to the United Nations Single Convention on Narcotics and you read Article 49, paragraph 2F, it says, with the exception of recreational, basically. So if our international commitment, which was just reinforced in December of 2020, is such that we are going to tightly regulate cannabis for anything other than scientific or medical purposes, how does that square with a relaxed regulatory scheme under federal law that allows recreational to take place? It doesn't. It doesn't. So that's the first thing that has to be squared. We can't even begin our dialogues until those 73 member nations all are operating under the same guidelines. And it's hypocritical to come into office and say, oh, we're going to make cannabis legal or we're going to reschedule, deschedule, when your international commitment says exactly the opposite of that. And guys, this is what happened with Prop 64, because when a state asserts a 10th Amendment right and says, listen, we don't care what the federal government says under the Controlled Substance Act, we're going to operate cannabis recreationally for profit. Well, for the past 24 years or so, we were operating under medical only, which in a nonprofit environment wasn't perfect. As I said, we could have expected our legislatures to clean that up, but don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. Don't throw out all the medical benefits that cannabis is recognized for, and more will come, as a replacement to prescription and opiate drugs for those conditions, the same conditions. Repair, relief, and prevention. That's what any medicine can take care of, any one to all three of those at once. Cannabis takes care of all three. It's so important that we protect that as medical cannabis goes. And artists like Whoopi Goldberg, when you look at her website, and she had just WhoopiandMaya.com, all of these things extolled the virtue of medical cannabis. Let's not get dissuaded or lose track of the site that's what got us here. Recreational should never compete with medical.
The veterans that I work with, the athletes that I work with, the people that are terminally ill, friends of mine, it's a totally different path, right? It's a totally different path. You can't compare it.
Night and day.
To me, just want to get high on my balcony on the weekends and just listen to music. It's very different lane.
the way, if I could,
it just pisses me off the way that they're lumped together.
If I could expand upon your thought there. So when I always say any medicine will be repair, relief, or prevention. So if you look at CBD, for example, that's prevention. That can be repair. Then you have CBN, which is good for coming off of opiates and relaxation, going to sleep. But then if you look at the psychoactive effects of THC, you're almost giving your body that break, which is relief.
Yeah.
All right. So it's in those combinations that it might take multiple prescriptions to accomplish. You do with one particular genetic. And now some of these genetics for repair and prevention are not psychoactive. So this becomes the other problem. If you're in a for-profit regulatory scheme, I'll keep using that word, what happens if it's not profitable to grow that plant anymore? They go away. And now you have states where they say you can't grow your own. No, you can see the train wreck coming.
How do you feel about Idaho?
I don't know much about Idaho. What's going on there?
All right, so the home of social equity. No, seriously though, H.G. Fredrickson created social equity, the actual term, who coined it in 1968, white man in Idaho. And Idaho just last week deemed that it will remain unconstitutional to ever have cannabis legal in the state.
Well, I mean, that's their prerogative, but from a medical standpoint, if a doctor and a patient have a relationship where there's something that will
you can't take your medicine and
benefit the condition, then it's morally, it's unethical to deny that. Now, I think what their fear is they haven't completely understood the dance that's going on right now in terms of trying to monopolize an industry. And that's this whole pay-to-play environment, which is systemic in California. It's systemic across the United States. But the nice thing about California, where we're calling out, in one case, Borges versus Mendocino, even though it's cannabis related, it's civil rights violations. This goes back to our civil rights being taken away by those in authority through licensing, would deny us the opportunity that's available equally, fairly, and impartially. And that ends up in federal court. And that's where I am right now too.
Tell us about your case. What's going on with your case?
My case started out as a very simple breach of contract over a property I own. It's a commercial property that was zoned, or in an area that was zoned eligible for a cannabis dispensary. Now, I have no interest in running a dispensary. So this individual comes up to me. We settle on a price to sell the property, convert it to a dispensary, and I would take a 10% net profit every month in addition to the sale of the property. And he refused to put that in writing. He said, "Oh yeah, I'll do that." But when somebody can't put something in writing or won't, that's the alarm bells go off. So I sold it to somebody else. Well, the problem is he then sues me, saying I breached his contract. But the idea is, when you have a breach of contract, it's called a fully integrated. That contract has to be completely integrated within the four corners of all the terms and conditions. And if it's not, then it's not fully integrated. Well, he sued me under the theory that it was a fully integrated contract. Now, 16 months later, by the way, any lawyer, first-year law student would have seen that and thrown it out. This judge hung on to it. And that's what my case comes down to now. I have a situation 4 years later that I've had 12 separate judges look at the case and allowed it to proceed. A jury ruled against me, but you can't enforce an illegal contract. So by virtue of him not being able to fully document what was in the terms and conditions, which he acknowledges, and by the fact that it was an illegal contract, he had contract or violations for running illegal dispensaries, which would not make him eligible for a license. So if you put a straw person in, which, by the way, that happens in social equity a lot too, they'll find a black person to be the face, and then they'll make the terms and conditions so restrictive that once the license is granted, that person gets basically shown the door. Right. So we have to protect against all those legal shenanigans. And in my case, I am now in federal court arguing these civil rights violations. There's a 42 USC 1983, which is, the ability to maintain the constitutional correctness of antitrust, because when groups gang together and they make it very restrictive as to who to get the license, that becomes an antitrust law violation, as well as other civil rights violations, the 4th and 14th Amendment. Judges should be able to act on this and realize that the state court judges failed. They don't do that either. Judges protect judges, and they do so under what's called absolute immunity. So what I will be filing this week is another case in federal court against the judges themselves, and that goes to the Ninth Circuit in my case, which is the largest federal court system we have in the United States, that this Chief Justice saw what was going on and let it happen. So by suing him, my argument and the lower court judges in federal and state court, I'll get the Supreme Court to look at this and say, okay, if there's absolute corruption, if we can prove that, if there's stupidity, maybe they can get immunity. If there's a bias or an error, maybe they can get a waiver and under immunity. But when there's corruption, we should have an opportunity to challenge that and be compensated for the stresses and losses that we faced as a result of that corrupt judicial governance. And I think this will end up in the Supreme Court, and I'll be a pro se, it means self-represented litigant, arguing that in the Supreme Court. I took over Dennis Peron's Facebook page, and I ghost wrote on his behalf. Be pretty good friends with him, and he told me that even after 64 had passed, the only way we're going to beat that back isn't going to be with successive replacement initiatives. It's going to be to beat it down in court. So one of the things that we're going to focus on is the constitutionality. And in the midterms of 2018, there was a ballot measure 9, I believe it was, that was designed to separate the state into 3 parts. It was an initiative that ran all the way up to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled under California's Constitution, Section 8D, I think, that a ballot measure cannot be overreaching. It must be focused on one particular element that the voters have to, be asked to vote on. The Supreme Court said that splitting the state into 3 parts was overreaching. Right. So I would argue the same thing could be said for cannabis. You have medical, recreational, you have hemp, you have broad spectrum cannabis. So all of these things coming together become areas that should be regulated independently and not under one all-encompassing initiative. That was the first thing. And then lastly, at the end of that argument was the fact that 64 allowed all the cannabis revenues to avoid the general fund. So it's never audited. It goes into a special trust fund. That is just asking for, the political parties to take advantage of it as their own little piggy bank. And that's exactly what we're seeing. They still haven't gotten money to schools. They haven't gotten money for a lot of things that tens, if not hundreds of $1 million have come in. It has been. It's over 300 million to date from just 2020. That was the projected revenues, 330 million projected revenues from cannabis for 2020, and it does not have to be accounted for.
No.
Yeah, it's unaudited.
And there's got to be way more than that.
There is, because all of the asset forfeitures, for example, that goes into that same piggy bank, and then various law enforcement, local government agencies take advantage of that to help make their budgets.
Right. How do we even where do we even begin to start fixing that?
Well, that's a great question. So if you look at your legislative and executive branches, which have been abysmal failures in the war on cannabis, and some would argue most elements of our governance, the only place that you could stand to have a chance, you could take the Black Lives Matter Antifa approach and, cordon off blocks and storm and fire and steal big screens and all that. But at the end of the day, nothing really changes. So my belief, and as a 60-year-old white guy, I just go and protest. And I go in front of the federal and state courthouses with my little wagon, and I say, point out that the judiciary has to be fair. Because if we, the people, can't go in front of a judge and expect fair and impartial and honest treatment based on existing law, then we have a problem. So that's why I think my case tangentially is so important to the cannabis march, because there's big money trying to get national policies in place that make Prop 64 look like a schoolyard tussle. And there's so much money at this.
Yeah, we were calling it the No More Act.
Yeah,
when the More Act was first passed, the biggest issue that I had with it, my whole team had with it, Monday night. We call it the Monday Night Massacre, right? When all those amendments were just like slipped in there in the middle of the night, like nobody's gonna see the shit.
How many pages is it up to now? Somebody told me 5,200.
I was gonna say something like over 3,000.
Yeah. And then they give you this midnight deadline. You got to come up with a vote within 3 hours. Come on.
Right. Swine factory. My issue with all of this is you claim to want to do good. You claim you're getting people their medicine, and then you all of a sudden load that thing up with so much pork that it doesn't even have anything to do with the war on drugs anymore.
No.
It has anything to do with the people who are fighting. It's the war on drugs 2.0. This is Joe Biden's war on drugs.
Yeah.
Right here. I'll just call it what it is. this isn't it's another attack on the poor.
It's
And
not a left, right, center thing either. This is a constitutional thing because generationally, we've all been denied our rights, and it's just been subsequent act upon subsequent act that's built upon it. And that's why I thought 151 Farms would be a nice alternative to a real world approach, something tangible that people can put their hands on and see in action.
CANiVISION, we believe that the cannabis industry is a three-legged stool. You have the business, you have the wellness, and you also have the community. No, that's the clearest delineation between us and other big industry. We are not big alcohol. We are not big tobacco. We are not big pharma. The reason why is everything that we do is driven from a community level up, grassroots. Everything is even built into the name. It built into the verbiage, grassroots. Yep. That is the core of who we are. That is our heart. That's our soul in this industry. The things that you're doing for the community right now through 151 Farmers, through your actions, through your words, more people need to hear about what you got going on. Who are some people that you have partnered with on a local level, on a state level, on a national level, in order to really get this movement rolling?
Well, I've been involved with a lot of local groups on the West Coast. There's Green Believers up in LA. I don't know if you're aware of them.
Cheryl,
I'm on her. If you go to their website, I'm on their board as a 151. More than anything, it's just my way of saying, listen, don't get tied up in the soil and CEQA, which is the California Environmental Quality Act. All these environmental impacts, they're real unless you're doing something different. With me, I do recirculating fish water. So in a worst case scenario, if the system breaches, I lose fish water. That's not going to hurt our aquifers. But on these big hydro grows where you have to input all the chemicals, there is a risk of, over the years, especially when it was unregulated or at least undetected, there was all this heavy metals drain off into our aquifers, which would end up in the ocean. And, environmentally, that's going to be a problem. You're going to see a lot of algae growth, and ability for those aquifers to survive is very, very limited. So in my particular design, I'm catching rainwater, I'm using solar. We can use metered water, but there's a whole host of problems with using the water that comes from, let's say, out of state. And then you get the Bureau of Reclamation involved, and they'll say, well, because it's a controlled substance, you can't use that water. So you could be in the middle of a grow and lose your water. So self-sufficiency to me means trying to avoid those regulatory and environmental stumbling blocks in the first place. And that's what this system of design of mine does.
Do you think that cannabis can unite people across party lines?
Oh, I think it must. We have one absolute requirement to be a 151 farmer, and that's you have to eat. So if you eat, you're in. And that crosses racial, gender, sexual preferences, economic, everything. In order to bring back a sense of posse comitatus, okay, an ability to bring our smallest government to our local forces. Now, posse comitatus was suspended under Bush after 9/11, but like Tip O'Neill said, all law is local. If you can go back to local law and making sense at a local, state, and national level, then we should all be allowed life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, okay? But it has to start local. By dividing us, COVID's been horrible for that. Then you find ways to spend your time by assaulting one another, be it online or, you identify with a particular left, right, center ideology, and that's really not you thinking, it's somebody else thinking for you, okay? Right. Especially young men who have a lot of energy, a lot of testosterone, they're going to run around and want to make a difference in their life. So we have to give them examples of what they can do long term. So maybe they do live to their 30s to do something that gives them a reason to get up out of bed every day and do so as whether they realize it or not, it's benefiting the community and it will benefit their children when they get to our age. So 151 represented that for me. And I continue to believe, based on everything I've seen, it's bringing us back to agricentric skill sets. And one of the best ways I think to do it is, by virtue of what we're doing soilless.
What do we have to look out for from you within the next couple of weeks? What do you have going on?
I think the judiciary. So I'm making my argument that if we continue to have assault on our First Amendment, now I've been asked to have a permit to go and protest on federal property. And this is after they had already approved one, Rico. And then they come back a week and a half later and goes, well, we screwed up. We need the marshals to approve it first. We need you to reapply. So I sent them off an email saying, listen, if I'm denied, you're going to be named in this lawsuit for violations of my First Amendment rights. Well, just get arrested. No, because to get arrested means I'm giving up, my ability to maintain the case. And that's another thing they'd like. So no, I'm right here at my 151 Farms doing what I've always done. I don't hide it. I've had judges look at what I'm doing, and they've allowed me to operate under Prop 215 because it's only medical. And I'm the only one in California that got that. And that's because I told the judge, there's disparity between 64 and 215, medical and recreational. So if I'm going to take a plea agreement, I want to be managed or regulated under medical only, and the judge agreed. So I'm on record stating that the discrepancies are such that you can't expect me to honor both.
What can we do about the judiciary to help you out immediately?
Nationally, I think we're gearing up for some assaults on some of the so-called activist groups that have historically acted like they were on behalf of the medical cannabis patient, when in fact that's not what they're really all about. There are places where attorneys can just chum the water looking for new clients, and they're so-called specialists, and only they know how to navigate these waters. Well, they bought and paid for it, people, and at the end of the day, when a license is available, they already know who's going to get it. Those other 10 or 20 applicants are just pissing their money away because it's non-refundable.
It's not refundable, and it's not normal either.
It's not normal, is it? Okay, he said it first.
All right, brother. Much love to you, Darryl. Please, for the people at home, can you tell them one more time where to find you? And I can't wait to have you back on, brother.
Oh, yes. We'll do it when you're getting your new digs, too. But go to 151farmers.org. Read our CANiVISION story. And then we're also on No More on 64. That's KNOW More 64, the numbers.org. So education about everything that's going on. Look for a new pack. It's going to be starting sometime later this week. You got
the pack there yourself, brother. Much love. I'll send it to you this afternoon, all right? All right.
Well,